Welcome back to the Theology of Business podcast. I'm your host, Darren Shear, author of The Marketplace Christian and Marketing Like Jesus. And this is a show that helps marketplace Christians to partner with God in business to help you make disciples of your coworkers, your company, and your industry. You can get more teachings and interviews like the one you're about to hear at theologyofbusiness.com. On today's episode, we'll be discussing Great Commission companies, and we're joined by Dr. Steve Rundle. Steve is professor of economics at Biola University. His teaching and research interests are focused on the intersection between international economics and world mission. He's a faculty advisor for the International Business Institute and for the Student International Business Association, and also consults and assists mission agencies, churches, and businesses that are trying to integrate business and missions. He's published 2 books, Great Commission Companies, The Emerging Role of Business and Missions, and also Economic Justice in a Flat World, Christian Perspectives on Globalization. And I actually first found out about Steve when I got a hold of his book, Great Commission Companies, and that's going to be the subject of our talk today. So welcome to the Theology of Business podcast, Steve.
Thank you, Darren. Glad to be here.
Well, you certainly are the expert on this concept, and so excited to hear what you're about to share with us. First of all, what is a Great Commission company, and what motivated you to research and develop this concept?
Let me start with the second question first. It really starts with my PhD program. I was, and this was close to 30 years ago now, but I was studying biotechnology partnerships and the economics of them. And I had as a consequence, if you know anything about the drug development process, you come up with an idea and it could take 10 years or more for your idea to finally get approved, if it does. Roughly 90+% fail. And so I was really interested in the financial organization of these very risky projects. And meanwhile, my wife and I, who are committed Christians, were very involved with the missions activities of our churches, serving on committees, attending mission conferences, and going on short-term mission trips. And somewhere along the way, probably at the conferences, I started meeting missionaries that were dabbling in business, which I thought was interesting, and eventually leaders of mission organizations and so forth. It started to, there was not a huge reputation, but I mean, people started to hear about me and my own interest in this area. And that's what I thought was going to be the extent of it, getting a job at a Christian university and helping these missionaries who were usually in way over their head and struggling in places where, capitalism really hasn't taken root properly, at least the Judeo-Christian expression of that. But then I ran into some people that really changed my paradigm completely. And one of those, I have to give credit to Dwight Nordstrom, a very good friend of mine. The term Great Commission companies was his, and I adopted it. But the idea behind that are, you have lots of Christian business people who are either owner or managing companies that are being forced to go global, just the changing nature of the global economy nowadays. And, whether by choice or not, they find themselves often in multiple locations around the world. And, oftentimes they're good Christians here locally, and they serve their church, and they know what it means to advance the cause of Christ here locally, but But now they find themselves in China or India or someplace like that, and they have no idea. This is a completely different experience for them. Or maybe they do. And the Great Commission companies that we ended up profiling for the book were people who very intentionally started a business with this purpose, this dual purpose of creating jobs and wealth for poor communities, but also reflecting Christ in places where there's very little witness for Christ around the world.
So if you had to boil it down, and this is the definition that I got from the book, is that a Great Commission company is a socially responsible, income producing business managed by kingdom professionals and created for the specific purpose of glorifying God and promoting the growth and multiplication of local churches in the least evangelized and least developed parts of the world.
Right.
And so as you define it, the Great Commission company is, I mean, aren't we just talking about the cross-cultural version of running a business that glorifies God, or is this something more than that?
Yeah, that's how I have come to define business as mission. The real elevator approach is just to say it's the cross-cultural expression of business as ministry, which is something I know your podcast talks about every week. And so these are people who have a solid theology of work and theology of business already, and now either by accident because of globalization or very intentionally they move overseas into a cross-cultural environment, and with the purpose, very intentional purpose of impacting those communities for Christ.
And I noticed that your book, Great Commission Companies, came out right about the same time as a book that probably many of our audience are familiar with, by Thomas Friedman, about the world is flat. And so did that provide, I can't remember if that one came out first or after yours, but either way, globalization was a pretty novel concept that I mean, it was difficult to miss that this is what is happening across our world, and that what is the response of mission to that in terms of sharing the gospel cross culturally, and so did that kind of help to inspire the timing?
In fact, we had globalization in the subtitle. The publisher ended up not liking that. They said it sounded too academic, but yeah, I'll bet we even quote in a few places in there Thomas Friedman. But let me tell you a story about someone I met at a church in the Midwest, probably 10 or more years ago, that illustrates what's going on here. And this wouldn't be a Great Commission company yet, but a business owner, I won't say what industry, but he said he was number 3 or number 4 in the industry. And he knew that survival depended on lowering his costs and so forth. And so he had narrowed it down. He'd already done some research and had narrowed it down to either setting up operations in Brazil or India. And so he asked me, this was a conference, and he said, what should I pick? And I, of course, that's not enough information to make an informed decision. But I asked him, have your church leaders been helping you with this decision? And he looked at me like I was a lunatic. Why would I ask my church leaders about something like this? But that's exactly what I think God is doing here, is completely upending our mission paradigm. It used to be you sent professional missionaries, and you know how that all works, where they raise funding, and many of the business people, being faithful Christians, are supporting them financially, and that we saw that as pretty much the extent of the role of the business person. Now, because of global forces, global economic forces, that's turning that whole paradigm upside down. And you're seeing the business people now suddenly out there going, this is a great opportunity. I wish, I knew how to leverage that. And many of them do, but that's what's going on here, what we tried to describe in the book.
And you have researched whether or not receiving financial support as a business's mission practitioner overseas, cross culturally, you found that practitioners who are fully supported by the business tend to outperform, sometimes significantly, donor supported businesses mission practitioners, and are no less fruitful in terms of spiritual impact. And so it probably makes, it's probably easy for us to understand why those types of businesses that aren't donor supported would be more profitable, because it forces you to make sure that you're actually creating value instead of just getting propped up with handouts. But I'm curious about the spiritual impact that you found that the non-donor supported businesses are no less fruitful than the donor supported ones.
Yeah, if you spend enough time going to these conferences and so forth, you start to realize there's two basic groups of people. There's those missionaries that are still dabbling, in my view, little. I mean, more often now they do have some business experience and training, but and then you also have the regular business people who just find themselves global and having an impact that the missionary would just die for. And what's going on there. So I sort of sense that in my intuition that those that are not affiliated with missionary sending agencies are often having the bigger impact and what's going on. And I'd like to make a case that it's economic incentives. And I tried to make that case initially, but I've been challenged on that score. And I think that's right. It's correlation doesn't prove causation. So, these people have regular businesses and they're earning regular salaries, and so their businesses are real businesses, what you and I would recognize as a real business. It's not some sort of front just so that I can be here legally in this country. And those who do operate the fronts and they have to get donor support because their business isn't a real business, and people aren't fooled. And so you have a small business, a small sphere of influence, and a small impact as a consequence. So since I've been sharing these results, and I've been working with a colleague, a friend at Wheaton College named Paul Lee, and he and I are still unpacking some of the findings. But the one you mentioned about donor-supported missionaries having no greater of an impact than the real businesses, people in the know that are out there say, oh, we knew that. Well, so no one seems to be surprised by the findings, but it's the first real scientific study of that.
And so what would be an example of a Great Commission company? And I'm curious specifically, how would you say, if somebody was to say, well, how is that company fulfilling the Great Commission on a daily, weekly basis? What are they actually measuring, or how are you helping them, or what are you looking at as a measurement to determine the extent to which they are fulfilling the Great Commission?
Well, I mean, when I'm not wearing my scientist hat and collecting survey data, I'm just looking at the business and talking to people that have had some contact with the people, and you can recognize it when you see it. When people are having an impact for Christ, people are hearing about Christ often for the first time, and they're often accepting Christ. But there may be other things. There may be, you see, humanitarian efforts taking place. One company in particular that's practically famous for his compassion for physically disabled people and former beggars, and hiring them and transforming over time. These people's lives are transformed, and so it's something you and I can recognize when we see it. And the book doesn't go into anything any more sophisticated than that. It just tells a lot of stories of businesses that, a couple of them in China, one in Romania, and forget where some of the others are. But in terms of the more recent studies I've been doing, that's tricky. How do you measure, quantify spiritual impact? And what we ended up doing was taking have you heard the language of multiple bottom lines, right? You have the
Yes.
economic and people in the BAM community would say there's 4 bottom lines to BAM, and we can debate that at some other time. But we ended up using that, taking that, and posting a survey on SurveyMonkey, and opened it up to any self-described BAM practitioner. So we didn't impose a definition on anybody. We did say you have to be a business, say that you're actually producing a service or a product and selling it in the marketplace. But you could be a nonprofit and still be doing that. And for each of the 4 bottom lines, we asked between about 6 and 8 or 9 questions, and some of them were quantitative questions, like how many people have you discussed Jesus with, or how many people are you discipling? How many people have you seen accept Christ? To be honest, we got a lot of pushback on the spiritual questions. A lot of people didn't like it's like, well, we don't count, I understand that, but we were just trying to get some sense. And so of all the 4 bottom lines that we tried to measure, I would say the spiritual one was the most difficult, and I would take it with the most grain of salt. But what we were able to glean from those imperfect questions was basically no difference in the 2 samples. You have the donor-supported missionaries. That's the only bottom line many of them care about. And then you had the real businesses, and you find out that they're, it's hard to say that either side is doing better than the other. So we weren't able to, our prediction was that the missionaries would score better on that mark, and we had to reject that. We couldn't reject the null hypothesis for that.
So what have been some of the best practices that you've found across these Great Commission companies? It's relatively easy to understand about that they produce a great product, or that they offer a great service, that they're socially responsible. They're not destroying the environment, and they're trying to take care of the environment. They're being good people at work. And then you also rolled in this idea of that they promote the growth and multiplication of local churches in these areas. What are maybe some specific examples of these kinds of things?
Well, let me just say for that last part, it is a co-authored book. I co-wrote with someone named Tom Steffen, who's he was a career missionary, and then eventually became a well-noted scholar in the area of church planting strategies and so forth. And so that was some language that he insisted on in terms of now can you be fulfilling the Great Commission, or can you be fulfilling the Great Commission and not necessarily seeing churches planted? And I'll bet he would argue, and I think I would probably agree that uh, almost the definition of fulfilling the Great Commission is that you see new people uh, now acknowledging Jesus as their Savior and gathering into churches, either existing churches or new churches. So yeah, so he insisted on that outcome. Uh, More recently, in particular, this most recent study, that's one of the possible expressions of the Great Commission, but it's not the only way people needed to show. But yeah, so in our book, every one of these companies, in some way or another, and it's in terms of best practices, I would say one common practice I see is that the business leader is often somewhat disassociated from the discipling and so forth. It just gets complicated. What if you have to discipline your employee and you just led them to the Lord, and then 2 weeks later you have to fire them or something like that? And so it's just people I have talked to, many of them have found through experience in many cases that it's best to have an executive team of people that are sort of, I mean, creating corporate events, or maybe it's a Bible study in the workplace and so forth, and whatever. So you often do end up seeing new believers joining existing churches, or new churches being created.
Well, even in the way an employee who isn't there, they're not doing their job for whatever reason, or they're just not. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe there's a character issue. Certainly, maybe it just wasn't the right fit. They don't have the right skill set. But assuming there was a character issue involved, even the process of firing that person and the way that they are transitioned, and that there's follow up. You don't just kind of drop them like a bad habit, but there is an opportunity for discipleship, even in the midst of that. And this person might be a believer already. Maybe they're a new believer. Maybe they've been in church all their life. But either way, I think if we look at it as this is a discipleship opportunity, that is exactly what it can be. And those opportunities, we don't necessarily get. They're not going to get that in their church. I mean, when was the last time you heard about somebody being excommunicated? Because we just, everybody's accepted. There's very, very little accountability, if at all. And so, I mean, the business world and these businesses provide that opportunity for discipleship. And so it sounds like the emphasis, though, here with Great Commission companies in particular would be on evangelization of new believers. Is that right?
For the book, yeah, you're probably right. But remember, these are places where, in many cases, I mean, there's very few, if any, Christians. The local people have often never met a Christian. So just by even arriving on the scene, you've almost evangelized to some extent. So it's not like they're hiring people and giving them tracts to go home with, along with their HR paperwork. But it's almost inevitable if, in many places, just being an American, they assume you're a Christian. So you're reflecting Christ, and if you are reflecting Christ, you're going to end up drawing people. You're going to be attractive, and people are going to come to you and hear about Christ too. So I would say yes. That's probably an essential part.
So if the Great Commission is not necessarily about going to make a profit or even planting churches, but it's to go make disciples.
Hmm.
There's just that definition, it seems, would be much broader than just because. And the fact that you're going into, say a 1040 window, place where
Hmm.
there are almost no Christians. I mean, just by virtue of you being there and you're representing Christ, people are going to want to follow that example. Ideally, if he's
Hmm.
represented properly, and that's that's what we call disciple making.
Right.
And so no matter what stage of their journey they're in, the Great Commission applies,
Hmm.
right? Because it's about helping people to become more like Jesus than they were yesterday.
Hmm.
And the evangelization part is kind of just the gateway,
Right.
the gateway into that.
Hmm.
Do you think that even in the way that the company conducts itself, that companies can, in the way that they're led, can result in discipling other companies to help? The way that you hold up these examples of Great Commission companies,
Hmm.
do you believe that there's even a Great Commission disciple making effect inherent there?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just think of Chick-fil-A. Everybody has heard of Chick-fil-A, and most people admire the company for what uh, it does, not only in terms of closing on Sundays, but all the other good deeds and the way it treats its workers and so forth. So, um, yeah, that's what's cool about the idea of Great Commission companies is that the company itself can be salt and light in its own way. Now, I mean, will a company be Christian and get saved and go to heaven? That doesn't make any sense. But it can be a beacon of light in a very dark community, and that would distinguish it from the tent maker who may be a Christian who works for Intel in Malaysia, and they might be having a gangbuster impact for Christ too, but you wouldn't call Intel a Great Commission company. You would just say that's a case of a tent maker having an impact. But yeah, so I think it's really cool when you have Christians taking a business and having even the business itself sort of communicating Christ in its own way.
So I guess it really kind of depends on who the company's leaders are, right? And what they're,
Yeah.
and if it's public, that gets a little more difficult because you have shareholders
Hmm.
involved. But um, I would assume that most of these Great Commission companies are probably not going to be public companies. They're
Yeah.
probably going to be privately held companies, right?
Yeah, and that's an open question still on whether you can do it as a publicly traded corporation. A lot of young people, especially, they go to business school, and that's what they learn to do. You grow a company, and eventually you take it public. And there's been some examples you could point to, but it doesn't seem to be long lasting. It seems once you you know have the quarterly earnings to the board gets behind all that, and I think an interesting story is AES, the president of that company, saying how and he was a believer and he's having a great impact at the business, but as soon as earnings started to go flat, the board ousted him. And so yeah, I haven't seen an example of a publicly traded corporation lasting at least very long as a Great Commission company.
Yeah, and I think that's why Truett Cathy told his
Hmm.
descendants, "Do not take this company public,"
Yep.
because so many of those what had been put in place would just be dismantled, probably pretty quickly
Yeah.
thereafter.
Yeah. Yeah.
As we're wrapping it up here, there is this tension in the body of Christ over this issue of, to what extent are are we are we to be pursuing spiritual objectives and then financial objectives, and you got one camp saying that, well, it's just enough that you're doing your business in a God honoring sort of a way, and of course they have a way of defining what that God honoring sort of a way is, namely that you're diligent, that you have that Protestant work ethic, that you're kind to people, that you're honest and so forth. And then the idea of God expecting anything else out of us in terms of actually doing it in a way that makes disciples. Why do you think there is this tension, and what can be done to bring us to more of a middle ground on this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. At Biola, and I know this is true at probably all other Christian colleges and universities, the School of Business or Department of Business was sort of the stepchild of the college. It was maybe the golden goose. That's how the university earns most of its tuition, but it's really that's not ministry. What we're really interested in is preparing people for ministry, and that happens in the seminaries and so forth. And it's taken years, and this. You went to Gordon Conwell and did your doctorate work on this, didn't you? I mean,
no, I was at Regent, and I did not do a doctorate. No, just a MA.
Where did I get that from? Okay.
Maybe you're prophetic. I don't know.
Yeah, you should. But there's been this battle going on for years, and now the pendulum has swung now, and at Biola for sure. I can't speak for other schools, but we have in our lobby on the wall, emblazed in the tile, business as ministry. We make it clear to anybody that comes to the School of Business that we are equipping people for ministry. So yes, to some, I would say even just doing their work for the glory of God, just be doing it honestly and doing it with their whole heart and so forth, pleases God. It's an act of worship. Can you do that then? Just stop there is what you're asking, right? And call yourself then a Great Commission company. And I think even if you are doing your business with your whole heart, that's going to look different. That's going to attract questions from people. You're going to end up sharing Jesus with people, whether you intended to or not. And yeah, call it unintentional sort of, serendipity and so forth. But it's, I don't know if you can just quietly sit there in the corner and do your accounting without people eventually getting to know you and hearing about Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, it is somewhat disturbing that, I mean, there's a large part of this movement, faith and work and whatever you want to call it, marketplace ministry, and every kind of stream has their own way of defining it, but there I've not seen such a downplaying or almost a distaste for evangelism or deliberately going about your work in a way that not just that you represent, the imago Dei, the image of God, because you're doing your work wholeheartedly, but that you're doing it in such a way that you would want somebody else to then reflect that same image of God, which is what discipleship is. Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. I mean, there just seems to be such a resistance in a way that I've actually never seen in my lifetime, which is somewhat ironic given the way that God is moving in the workplace.
I go to a lot of social entrepreneurship conferences, and social entrepreneurship is a lot like business as mission, except there's no Christ in the middle of it. It might be a false god or something else, or no god at all, but it's a secular version of BAM. And I have to tell you, I get uncomfortable sometimes. Now, that's where you'll hear the multiple bottom lines. And so, what makes, say, Newman's Own, the salad dressing maker, what makes his company so honorable is because he also gives a lot of money to charity and so forth. And so, there's that social bottom line. It's a classic case of a double bottom line business, and now they claim three because they've added the environment. And so what some people in the BAM movement have done is said, well, let's just use that sort of describes BAM, let's just add a fourth bottom line. And I've always been pretty uncomfortable with this, and I'll tell you, in the social entrepreneurship conferences, what you find out is Newman's Own is honorable because it gives its money away, not because he makes a great product and his company, pays a fair wage and all this sort of thing. And so it's exactly that same argument, only now I can't appeal to scripture and say, wait a minute, I think this company on its own. I just saw the movie Lion. Have you seen it by any chance?
I haven't.
That kid who grew up in India and then got separated from his family, and 25 years later he tries to go find his family, and he ended up using Google Earth, and it's a true story. And I just walked away from that movie just marveling at what a good God that there were Christians working, doing their best job developing Google Earth, and made it possible for this kid to find his family eventually, and who knows what other kind of good things have happened around the world because Google Earth exists. And you could go on and on, product by product. I think God is pleased when people are just doing business. And so I'm torn. I can feel your own frustration and pain, because I have the same frustration. I have sort of adopted the four bottom line just because it's already out there, and it's somewhat useful. It's a little clunky. You have to check a box. Okay, I just gave somebody a day off with pay. Is that which bottom line does that fit under? And it gets kind of silly after pretty quickly. But so I don't have an answer to your question, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know for me, it's got to be real simple. And I think as simple as it gets for me is, what would Jesus do?
Mm-hmm.
And what does Jesus look like in this situation, in this business deal, in this hiring decision, and however I'm conducting myself. And then ultimately, if I'm blessed to be able to be the, leader, founder, one of the, or a leader at any level of a company, that I would then be able to shape culture in a way that the culture of my company would then begin to disciple other cultures. And I think that's why the Great Commission is to make disciples of not just individuals, but nations.
Yeah.
And you really have to go after each level of organization in between there in order to disciple an entire nation. And so, I think it's probably simpler than we even make it out to be. That what is the character of Jesus, and actually praying, what a concept, like that we could actually hear from God what his will is for this situation. And we live like that. We represent Jesus. We're making disciples because Jesus will shine through us, and people are going to want that. Doesn't mean you beat them over the head with the Bible. I think that's where probably a lot of the criticism and frustration comes from other camps in the body of Christ in this movement, where, going to such another extreme where it really is just sort of business for the sake of business, or work for work's sake, because, God created work before the fall and so forth. And I believe all that, but, there's just such a bigger opportunity here, to represent Jesus. Steve, what would be a parting piece of advice you'd like to leave with our listeners today?
Wow. Not too long ago, I was in Hong Kong giving a speech on business as mission, and a lot of people stood up afterwards in the Q&A, and they gave an example of their business. Would you consider this an example of BAM? And would you consider? And I must have been asked that a dozen times that night, and I was so uncomfortable. I was squirming so badly up there. Because I don't want to be the arbiter of that anyway, and I don't know if it matters. What I get excited about is when people obey God, whatever that is, and maybe it turns out to be a nonprofit or something. And by all means, let me tell me how I can help, and don't get too caught up in definitions and so forth. I think that's sort of an academic thing. That's something academics like to do, is argue about definitions. I'm with you. I'm more, let's keep it simple. Just follow God's leading and don't worry about the definition.
Well said. And people can certainly get a hold of both of your books at Amazon, Great Commission Companies, as well as Economic Justice in a Flat World. Is there another place you'd recommend people go and check out more about what you're doing, Steve?
Boy, Biola, come on over. They can reach me on my email address, steve.rundle@Biola. I think that's there's a conference in Dallas, I think it is, in September, Business as Mission, that you'll get to, whoever goes will hear a lot of testimonies from real practitioners out there, and I'll be there as well. So
wonderful. All right, we'll have the link to. I'll just put the link to your bio on biola.edu, so people go and check out more. It's a wonderful school. You guys have put a lot of your lectures and so forth on YouTube, to be a voice out in the culture, those that might not actually attend Biola, but you can still get a hold of such a wealth of free information and teaching out there. I recommend everybody go check out. I've watched countless hours myself. But Steve, thanks for sharing your time today, and may God continue to bless the work you're doing to make an impact on students and paving the way for other Great Commission companies.
Okay, my pleasure.
Hope you've enjoyed this episode. You can share your feedback and get more information to help you partner with God in business and disciple your coworkers, your company, and your industry at theologyofbusiness.com. The Theology of Business podcast is sponsored by Airlift Marketing. It's a noisy world out there, and at the same time, it's never been easier to reach a highly specific group of people with your message, product, service, or cause. Through website development, social media management, podcast management, pay-per-click advertising campaigns, and branding, Airlift Marketing helps businesses, nonprofits, and authors to reach their target groups with precision and get the highest return possible on their investments in marketing. Reach out to us at airliftmarketing.com to schedule a free 15-minute marketing strategy consultation. Thanks for listening, and keep partnering with God in your business.